You question whether the avoidant thinks about you after the relationship ended, whether they miss you, whether they experience any emotional turmoil about the loss, or whether they simply moved on without difficulty the way their calm external presentation suggests. You analyze their silence for clues about their internal state. Does their lack of contact mean they feel nothing? Does their apparent ease moving forward indicate you meant less to them than they meant to you? Does their defended composure suggest the relationship's ending affected them minimally while you remain devastated by the loss? Yet the avoidant's external presentation of calm indifference masks internal reality that differs dramatically from what their behavior suggests. Behind the defended silence, behind the apparent ease with which they moved forward, behind the lack of contact that seems to indicate you no longer occupy space in their thoughts, the avoidant is burning, experiencing intense emotional turmoil they cannot express, thinking about you obsessively while appearing completely indifferent, suffering in ways their defensive structure prevents them from revealing or acting upon. The burning manifests as constant, intrusive thoughts about you that interrupt their daily functioning, as painful longing they cannot satisfy because satisfying it would require vulnerable pursuit their defenses forbid, as regret that circles endlessly through their mind without translating into action that could address that regret, as grief they process alone in silence because expressing grief would mean admitting they need someone in ways their defended position cannot tolerate acknowledging. This internal burning creates genuine suffering for the avoidant, yet this suffering remains invisible to you because their defensive structure requires maintaining external presentation of being fine, of having moved on, of being unaffected by loss that internally devastates them. The defended avoidant experiences tragic split between internal reality of intense feeling and external presentation of minimal feeling. They burn internally while projecting ice externally, suffer privately while appearing comfortable publicly, obsess about you constantly while seeming to have forgotten you completely. Understanding this gap between their internal burning and their external silence serves two critical functions. It allows you to recognize that their lack of contact does not necessarily indicate lack of feeling, prevents you from interpreting their silence as proof they feel nothing, when actually their silence often indicates they feel too much in ways their defenses cannot manage. Yet it also requires accepting that their internal burning typically does not translate into behavioral change or pursuit because their defensive structure that prevents expression of the burning is stronger than the burning itself, meaning you cannot wait for their suffering to override their defenses because that override rarely occurs regardless of how intensely they burn internally. The avoidant can burn for you silently for months or years without ever reaching out, without ever expressing what they feel, without ever taking action to restore connection, because their defensive structure makes burning in silence feel safer than vulnerable pursuit, makes private suffering feel more manageable than risk of expressing need and facing potential rejection. Your recognition of their burning should not generate hope that their suffering will eventually motivate their pursuit. Instead, it should generate clarity that someone who burns in silence rather than pursuing connection is someone whose defensive structure is too rigid to allow the vulnerable action that genuine relationship requires regardless of what they feel internally. The silence masks intense internal turmoil they cannot express without breaking their defenses. The avoidant maintains rigid silence about their internal state, about their feelings regarding the relationship's ending, about whether they miss you or think about you or regret their patterns that cost them the relationship. This silence appears to indicate calm acceptance of the ending, emotional neutrality about the loss, minimal internal processing about what occurred. You interpret their silence as evidence they have moved on easily, that the relationship meant less to them than it meant to you, that they possess emotional detachment allowing them to end intimate connection without experiencing the turmoil you experience. Yet their silence masks, rather than reflects their internal reality. Beneath the defended, quiet exterior, the avoidant experiences intense emotional turmoil that their defensive structure prevents them from expressing or revealing to you, or often even fully acknowledging to themselves. The internal turmoil manifests through intrusive thoughts about you that interrupt their daily functioning, despite their attempts to suppress those thoughts through distraction or rationalization. They cannot complete simple tasks without their mind wandering to memories of you, to regret about patterns that cost them the relationship, to wondering what you are doing now or whether you think about them or whether you have moved on with someone new. They lie awake, processing conversations from the relationship, analyzing what they could have done differently, imagining alternative scenarios where they were capable of providing what you needed. They experience their daily life as diminished by your absence. Activities feel less satisfying without sharing them with you. Achievements feel hollow without your recognition. Struggles feel more difficult without your support. This constant intrusive preoccupation creates genuine suffering that consumes mental and emotional energy, despite their external presentation suggesting they have moved on completely. The turmoil also includes painful longing for connection they cannot pursue because pursuing would require vulnerability their defensive structure forbids. The avoidant wants to reach out to you, wants to know how you are, wants to restore some form of contact, wants to hear your voice or see you, or share what is happening in their life. Yet acting on this longing would mean admitting they need you, would mean taking vulnerable step of pursuit that risks rejection, would mean breaking their defended position of being fine without you. The defensive structure makes the cost of pursuing feel higher than the cost of continuing to long silently. Pursuing risks the devastating outcome of you rejecting them or responding with indifference or having moved on completely, whereas longing silently at least preserves their defended comfort and protects them from facing potential rejection that vulnerable pursuit would create possibility of experiencing. The internal turmoil particularly intensifies around specific triggers that activate their attachment system and their regret. They see something that reminds them of you, a place you visited together, an activity you enjoyed, a song you shared, a food you cooked for them, an experience wave of grief about your absence that temporarily overwhelms their defended suppression. They face challenge or difficulty and instinctively want to reach out to you for support before remembering you are no longer available to them. They have success or positive experience and feel its emptiness because they cannot share it with you. They observe couples demonstrating healthy intimacy and feel painful recognition of what their patterns prevented them from building with you. These triggers create moments where their defended suppression fails and they feel full force of their loss before their defenses reassert and push the feelings back down into silent suffering. The turmoil also includes shame and regret about their patterns that their defensive structure prevents them from expressing or addressing. The avoidant recognizes at some level that their patterns caused the relationship's failure, that their withdrawal harmed you, that their emotional unavailability left your needs unmet, that their defended limitations prevented them from being adequate partner to someone who accommodated those limitations extensively. This recognition generates shame about being person whose patterns harm others, and regret about losing someone important through their own defended inadequacy. Yet expressing this shame and regret would require acknowledging their patterns as problems requiring change, would mean admitting they were inadequate partner, would mean taking responsibility that their defensive structure exists specifically to avoid. The unexpressed shame and regret circle through their internal experience, creating suffering they cannot release through expression or action. The inability to express internal turmoil without breaking defenses is a critical aspect of avoidant psychology. The defensive structure operates through specific mechanisms: deactivation of attachment needs, suppression of vulnerable emotions, maintenance of defended autonomy, protection from intimacy that threatens their defended position. Expressing the internal turmoil would require dismantling these defensive mechanisms. Admitting they miss you breaks deactivation by acknowledging attachment need. Sharing their regret breaks suppression by expressing vulnerable emotion. Reaching out for contact breaks defended autonomy by demonstrating need for connection. Pursuing reconciliation breaks protection from intimacy by actively seeking closeness. The avoidant faces impossible choice between continuing to suffer silently within their defensive structure or expressing turmoil in ways that would dismantle the defenses that have protected them throughout their life. The avoidant chooses silent suffering over defensive dismantling because their entire psychological organization depends on maintaining defensive structure, even when that structure creates intense internal pain. The defenses feel essential to survival in ways the relationship does not feel essential. Losing the defenses feels more threatening than losing you. Breaking defended position feels more dangerous than continuing to burn in silence. The internal turmoil is real and intense, yet it remains trapped within defensive structure that cannot release it through expression or action without threatening the defended psychological organization the avoidant has built entire life maintaining. You cannot see their burning because seeing it would require them expressing it, and expressing it would require breaking defenses. They will protect even at cost of losing you and at cost of suffering silently rather than pursuing connection that could address their turmoil. They're obsessively thinking about you while appearing completely indifferent. The avoidance external presentation suggests complete indifference to you and to the relationship's ending. They do not reach out, do not respond to your attempts at contact beyond minimal polite acknowledgement, show no visible signs of being affected by the loss, appear to move forward with their life as if the relationship never occurred, or as if its ending created no disruption to their functioning. Their social media suggests they are doing fine or perhaps even better than fine. Their mutual friends report they seem unbothered by the breakup. Their calm energy, when you encounter them accidentally, suggests they have achieved peace about the ending while you remain in turmoil. This external indifference appears to indicate internal indifference. You assume their lack of visible suffering means lack of actual suffering, that their apparent ease moving forward reflects genuine emotional neutrality about losing you. Yet, behind this carefully maintained external indifference, the avoidant thinks about you obsessively in ways that would shock you if you could access their internal experience. You occupy constant space in their thoughts despite their behavior suggesting you never cross their mind. They wonder what you are doing throughout each day, whether you are at work or at home, whether you are alone or with others, whether you are thinking about them or have moved on completely. They imagine conversations with you where they explain themselves or express feelings they cannot express in reality. They rehearse what they would say if they reached out, composing and deleting messages they lack courage to send. They check your social media compulsively despite not liking or commenting, consuming every piece of information about your life while maintaining appearance of complete disinterest. The obsessive thinking manifests through constant monitoring of information about you that they can access without direct contact. They track your social media posts carefully, analyzing photos for clues about your emotional state, scrutinizing captions for hidden meanings about whether you miss them, noting who interacts with your content to assess whether you might be seeing someone new. They ask mutual friends about you while pretending casual interest, listening carefully to any information about how you are doing or whether you mention them. They drive past your home or frequent places you visit, hoping to catch a glimpse of you, while telling themselves they just happen to be in the area. They save mementos from relationship they cannot bring themselves to discard, photos, gifts, items that remind them of you, looking at these privately while maintaining external presentation of having moved on completely. The gap between obsessive internal focus and indifferent external presentation creates cognitive dissonance. The avoidant manages through compartmentalization. They separate their private thoughts and feelings from their public behavior, maintaining two distinct realities that do not integrate. In private moments alone, they allow themselves to feel and think about you intensely. They miss you, they regret their patterns, they wish things were different, they long for connection they cannot pursue. In public moments or in any context where others might observe, they switch to defended presentation where you do not matter, where they are fine, where the relationship's ending affected them minimally. This compartmentalization allows them to experience their feelings privately while protecting those feelings from exposure that would create vulnerability. The obsessive thinking particularly intensifies when they observe or learn information, suggesting you are moving on, healing, building life without them, potentially seeing someone new. These observations activate their attachment system and their fear of permanent loss in ways that their usual deactivation cannot fully suppress. They become consumed with thoughts about whether you think about them anymore, whether you regret the ending or feel relief, whether a new person in your life treats you better than they treated you, whether you are happier without them than you were with them. The obsessive focus on your moving on creates painful internal experience they cannot express. They want to reach out to interfere with your moving on, yet they cannot justify such reach out given they ended the relationship. They want reassurance, You still care about them. Yet asking for such reassurance would reveal their own continued caring they need to keep hidden. The obsessive thinking also serves defensive function by allowing the avoidant to maintain connection to you psychologically while avoiding actual connection that would require vulnerability. Thinking about you constantly creates illusion of ongoing relationship, allows them to feel close to you through their thoughts without risking actual closeness, permits them to process their feelings privately without exposing those feelings to your response. The obsessive internal focus substitutes for actual contact, providing defended form of connection that does not require vulnerable pursuit or expression of need. This substitution allows them to maintain you as present in their psychological world while keeping you absent from their actual life in ways that protect their defenses. Understanding that the avoidant thinks about you obsessively, despite appearing indifferent, allows you to recognize their silence does not indicate you are forgotten or insignificant to them. Yet, this understanding should not generate hope that their obsessive thinking will translate into contact or pursuit, because the same defensive structure that requires them to hide their obsessive thoughts also prevents them from acting on those thoughts through reaching out. They can think about you constantly for months or years without ever contacting you because their defenses make silent obsession feel safer than vulnerable expression. The obsessive thinking is real, yet it remains trapped in their internal world, invisible to you, generating suffering for them without generating any behavioral change that would restore connection or allow you to see that you remain constantly on their mind despite their external presentation of complete indifference. The burning intensifies specifically because they cannot reach out without losing control. The avoidant's internal suffering about losing you would be manageable if they could express it, if they could reach out to you, if they could pursue reconnection or at least communicate their feelings. The ability to take action to address suffering typically reduces that suffering by providing sense of agency and by creating possibility of resolution. Yet the avoidant cannot take these actions without dismantling their defended position of control, without admitting need in ways that violate their defended autonomy, without surrendering the protected position they have maintained throughout relationship and especially since ending it. This inability to act on their feelings creates a specific form of intensified suffering, where the burning increases precisely because they cannot release it through expression or action. The burning intensifies through the avoidant's experience of being trapped between conflicting needs. They need to maintain defended control, yet they need connection with you. They need to protect themselves from vulnerability, yet they need to express their feelings. They need to preserve their autonomy, yet they need to admit they miss you and want contact. These conflicting needs create internal pressure that has no outlet, because any action they take to address one need threatens the other need. Reaching out would address their need for connection, yet would threaten their defended control. Expressing feelings would release internal pressure, yet would create vulnerability they cannot tolerate. Admitting they miss you would provide relief, yet would violate their defended autonomy. The avoidant remains frozen in this impossible position, where any movement feels dangerous, where they can only suffer silently rather than taking action that would risk their defended position. The control issue is central to understanding why the avoidant cannot reach out despite burning desire to do so. Throughout relationship, the avoidant maintained control through managing distance. They controlled when to engage and when to withdraw, when to provide presence and when to create space, when to allow intimacy and when to establish boundaries. This control allowed them to regulate their defended comfort by approaching when they felt safe and retreating when intimacy exceeded their tolerance. Reaching out to you after ending relationship would mean surrendering this control. They would be approaching you from position of need rather than position of choice, would be pursuing rather than being pursued, would be demonstrating they want connection rather than allowing you to demonstrate you want connection. This loss of control feels intolerable to defended psychology that has organized around maintaining control as protection against vulnerability and potential abandonment. The burning also intensifies because unexpressed feelings compound rather than dissipate across time. If the avoidant could reach out when they first started missing you, that initial missing might have been manageable feeling easily expressed. But because they could not reach out without losing control, the missing accumulated day after day, intensifying as their life without you revealed what your presence had provided, as their defended isolation proved less satisfying than they anticipated, as their patterns with new people reminded them of what they lost with you. The accumulated unexpressed feelings create pressure that increases constantly without release mechanism, generating suffering that worsens across time rather than diminishing as they remain unable to act on feelings that continue intensifying. The intensified burning creates specific painful experiences for the avoidant. They feel constant tension between wanting to reach out and being unable to reach out that exhausts them mentally and emotionally. They experience grief about the loss, combined with frustration that their own defenses prevent them from addressing that grief through pursuing reconnection. They face that they are creating their own suffering through their defended limitations, yet they cannot overcome those limitations sufficiently to change their behavior. They recognize they are trapped in prison of their own psychological structure, yet they lack keys to escape that prison, because the escape would require dismantling defenses that feel essential to survival. The burning that intensifies through inability to act creates particular crisis points where the pressure temporarily overcomes the defended resistance. The avoidant might reach out during these crisis moments with minimal breadcrumb contact, late-night text saying they were thinking about you, brief message asking how you are, social media interaction that suggests they are paying attention to your life. Yet even these minimal contact attempts occur within defended framework that maintains their control. They reach out at times and in ways that allow them to retreat easily. If your response feels too intimate or demanding, they keep contact minimal enough that it does not require them to express actual feelings or actual needs. They maintain plausible deniability that the contact means anything significant beyond friendly check-in. These defended minimal contacts provide brief pressure release without requiring them to actually surrender control or admit genuine need in ways that would restore connection. Understanding that burning intensifies specifically because they cannot reach out without losing control allows you to recognize their silence reflects their defended psychology rather than their lack of feeling. Yet this understanding should clarify that waiting for their burning to overcome their need for control is typically futile strategy, because the need for control often proves stronger than the burning regardless of how intense that burning becomes. The avoidant can burn indefinitely while maintaining control rather than reaching out in ways that would surrender control, even temporarily. Their burning is real, yet their defended structure is stronger than their burning, meaning the internal suffering typically continues without producing behavioral change that would restore connection or allow you to benefit from knowing they burn for you silently. Their suffering is real, but their capacity to act on it remains limited by their structure. The avoidant experiences genuine suffering about losing you. The grief is real, the regret is real, the longing is real, the recognition of what they lost is real. This is not performance or manipulation. It is authentic emotional pain that affects their daily functioning, their sleep, their concentration, their overall well-being. The suffering manifests through all the ways grief manifests. Sadness that interrupts their day unexpectedly, tears they shed alone when defenses temporarily fail, aching emptiness where your presence used to be, painful awareness of having lost something important through their own limitations. Recognizing the reality of their suffering is important because it allows you to understand their silence does not indicate lack of caring. Their lack of pursuit does not indicate you meant nothing to them. Their defended presentation does not reflect their actual internal experience. Yet the genuine nature of their suffering does not translate into capacity to act on that suffering in ways that would restore connection or that would allow you to benefit from their feelings. The suffering exists within defensive structure that prevents expression and prevents vulnerable action, regardless of intensity of internal pain. The avoidance defensive organization includes specific limitations that constrain their behavioral options even when their emotions would motivate different behavior if those emotions could override the defensive constraints. Understanding these structural limitations allows you to recognize why their burning typically does not produce the pursuit or the reconciliation you might hope for, despite the genuine intensity of their internal experience. The structural limitations manifest through the avoidant's inability to tolerate vulnerability that reaching out would require. Even though they burn to contact you, even though they long to restore connection, even though they regret their patterns and wish things were different, taking action on these feelings would require vulnerable exposure they cannot tolerate. Reaching out means admitting they need you in ways their defended autonomy cannot acknowledge. Expressing their feelings means revealing internal experience they have learned to protect. Pursuing reconciliation means risking rejection that would devastate them more profoundly than continuing to suffer in silence. The defensive structure makes vulnerability feel more threatening than ongoing suffering, makes risk of rejection feel more dangerous than certainty of continued loss, makes exposed pursuit feel less safe than defended silence. The structural limitations also include the avoidant's inability to maintain changed behavior, even if their suffering temporarily motivates them to reach out or to express interest in reconciliation. The suffering might create crisis point where they override their defenses momentarily to make contact. They send message expressing they miss you, they suggest meeting to talk, they indicate interest in trying again. Yet even if this crisis-driven contact occurs, their underlying defensive structure remains unchanged, meaning any reconnection would likely recreate the same patterns that caused the original ending. The avoidant lacks capacity to sustain the vulnerability and the consistent presence that healthy relationship requires, because that capacity would require fundamental restructuring of their defensive organization through intensive therapeutic work they typically resist engaging. The suffering also coexists with defended rationalizations that prevent action despite the pain. Even while burning for you, even while missing you intensely, the avoidant maintains parallel thoughts that justify their silence and their lack of pursuit. You are better off without them. Their patterns would just hurt you again. The relationship was not right for them regardless of their current feelings. Reaching out would be selfish when they cannot guarantee they would behave differently. These rationalizations allow them to frame their inaction as protecting you or as accepting reality, rather than recognizing their inaction as defensive avoidance. The rationalizations provide psychological permission to continue suffering silently rather than taking vulnerable action. Allow them to feel their inaction is thoughtful or mature rather than defended and limited.